I got 9 movements for your hips today. Starting out on the ground with these shin box rotations, the big thing here is I'm thinking about using my hands to keep my posture nice and upright. From there, I'm keeping my heels on the ground. That's my pivot point that I'm working with. Far too often than not, I see people trying to reach their arms up, then they get these big flexion curve in their spine. They start to scoot across the floor. You may notice when you do that movement that your body starts to work your way forward. I like keeping my hands down on the ground to kind of keep my posture nice and upright. It kind of eliminates that and really allows me to focus on my hips as I'm working through internal and external rotation. Heel clicks are a great way to go from the shin box setup and isolate one hip at a time. So from here, I'm gonna grab my left ankle and put my left hand on the ground and really create some tension on my upper body. And from here, I'm going to lift this back leg up, going up off the ground, and I'm gonna find that external rotation of my hip, touching my heels together, and then I'm gonna go back. From here, I'm gonna touch my knee to the ground, finding internal rotation of this hip. My foot is not touching the ground, and I'm gonna go back and forth, tapping my heels together, and then going back to my knee. I'm trying to keep my posture as upright as possible, but if you can't maintain that position to really isolate your hip, or maybe you're finding a really deep cramp, you can always go from your elbow position. And from here, really try to isolate that rotation that's occurring, but I really wanna make sure I'm driving my knee up, scooping my heel across the floor without it touching, and then return back to that position, keeping my knee nice and high, and then bringing it back down to the ground, finding internal rotation. These are figure 4 contours. I'm basically getting a little bit more dynamic contouring around the ground with an extended limb. So I'm holding this number 4, as I would call it, and I'm contouring around the ground, not letting it touch, finding some rotation, going back, not letting my foot touch the ground, tapping my knee to the ground, lifting my knee up, extending that leg from the back point, and pulling it around. I really want you to kind of hold this pause for a little bit, holding this hip flex position without biasing too far over. And then from here, from this upright position, shaping around the ground, contouring, tap your knee if you'd like, really trying to reach this heel, reach this knee behind me, picking it up, and from here, trying to extend this leg as fast as we can, so I really have to own that range of motion as I contour around the ground. For the glute mobilization, I'm gonna start from this quadruped setup. From here, I'm gonna go with my left arm up. This is gonna kind of create some tension on my upper body. I'm gonna try to keep my chest square to the ground, and I'm gonna slide my right leg back. From here, I'm gonna think about picking this leg up without finding extension in my lower back, really trying to keep my abs nice and tight. And from here, I'm gonna contour around the ground, tapping my heel, taking it up to the back, tapping my toe. Really trying to focus on that rotation that's occurring at my hip, not allowing my lower back to droop or my back to kind of take over the movement. I'm really trying to focus on that rotation that's occurring at the hip. Key thing here though is active flexion through my trunk. The second I extend, now I'm giving access to that range of motion to my hip from my back. We don't want that. We really want to focus on that rotation that's occurring there. From the side, give myself a brace, push my left hand into the ground, create some tension, drive my left hip up through extension, up and around, tap my heel, take it back, tap my toe. Up around to the side, tap my heel, take it back, tap my toe. Next, I'm gonna go with this adductor rock back. The adductors are definitely one of the most overlooked areas of our hips when it comes to their tie-in with the pelvis and the amount of stress that it can go and the lack of internal rotation I find with a lot of military and athletes. We really wanna focus on that tissue and try to find ways to glide into it, feel tension, address it, get a little bit deeper. So from here, I'm thinking about left legs off to the side, hands are on the ground, and I just want us to drift back. If it feels good, you might want to rotate your foot up if you're lacking tension, kind of bring the hamstrings in a little bit, but I really like for you to keep that toe closed down to really focus on the adductors. Hands go forward. When I go forward, I'm squeezing my glutes, driving my hips, not arching my lower back. Exhale as I go back into a range of motion to find a little bit deeper depth. Inhale forward, squeeze glutes. Rock it back. Feel that tension. Bring it forward. Squeeze glutes. Exploring that tension of the hamstrings. Now I'm gonna kind of get from this half kneeling setup and I'm gonna slide back. I'm gonna feel this tension in my hamstrings and then I'm gonna drift forward, driving my right glute, getting that big stretch in my hips, and I'm just gonna kind of go back and forth. Feel that tension across this left hamstring, drive my hips forward, back and forth. Feeling tension, easing into it. Sliding back, feeling that hamstring, pushing forward, keeping my hips underneath me, driving my right hips. I get a little bit of an accessory of my left ankle as I'm driving forward, but I'm pushing my hips forward, not arching my back. I'm really trying to drive my right glute. Dynamic groin drift, changing the angles in that webbing of our groin. I'm gonna rock forward, making sure I'm driving my left glute. I'm not just arching my back. And from here, I'm gonna rock back. Dynamically, I'm gonna stabilize on this left hip, and I'm gonna drift off to the side. So basically just challenging that webbing of my groin with different angles. If I look at this like a clock, I'm going from 12 o'clock, and then just kind of have fun with this. Over to the side to 3 o'clock, drift the deep hip position, then over here to like 1 or 2 o'clock, drifting into my hips, really trying to take my pelvis to the heel of my foot whilst driving my left glute to kind of find that position. And then off to the side, drifting into that heel. Involving the glutes and hip extension, I'm gonna go from this supine position, laying flat on my back. I'm gonna kind of bring my heels in some, so I'm getting a little bit more out of my glutes and less out of my hamstrings. And from here, all I want you to think about is we're gonna go one leg up. This is kind of tight to the chest. I'm gonna drive my hip into extension, driving this glute, and I'm up. And I'm gonna go back down. Big thing here when we start is I want you to go into a posterior pelvic tilt, almost like you're trying to point your butthole up to the ceiling. That's gonna keep your pelvis in that good position. From there, I like to bias my feet by pulling my toes up to really focus on driving through the heel. And I'm gonna push my elbows into the ground, give me a little bit of upper body tension. Up, control back down. Up, hold a slight pause, back down. Up, slowly back down. Working up to our feet, we're gonna go to this lateral squat. I like to kind of bias my hamstrings a little bit and kind of turn my foot as I drift deep into this lateral squat. I feel it helps me find my hips a little better and really try to focus on that hip that I'm going into versus keeping my foot flat on the ground, and I really can't achieve that due to the range of motion that I have. But I feel this setup, rotating my foot up, allows me to kind of sit deep in my hips and really trying to focus on that webbing of my groin, load the hamstrings, really load those hips as I drift laterally, loading the frontal plane, going side to side. Give those movements a try and see if they help.